Welcome back to another episode of Realty Resilience. I'm your host, Dave Nations, and founder of Nations Network, powered by Keller Williams Realty. Really excited about this episode and our guest that we're going to interview today. I've got Kyle Wallace. Kyle, how you doing, man?
Good, man. How are you?
I am doing great. Looking forward to jumping into our conversation today and hearing all about your business. You have some really unique things and cool things going on in your world. I know it's been a minute since you and I talked last, and I feel like every time I get to talk to you, you've always got some really fascinating things going on. If you don't mind, if you want to share background, what the market's like in Tennessee, where you're at, and kind of jump into how you got into this.
Yeah, man. That's great. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. So yeah, I've been in the industry now for about 9 years, and gosh, whenever I got in, prior to real estate, I was a full-time youth pastor. So working at a church, and my dad was a pastor, growing up, so he still is. And so I was a PK and was kind of like following in his footsteps. But I always loved real estate. So I watched, actually not too far from you. I don't know even know if you know this, but I was born in Alton, Illinois. So just across the river from St. Louis on
I
the
think we
Illinois
talked about
side.
that because you're a Cardinals fan, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, diehard Cardinals fan. Right now they're letting me down the last couple of years, but I'm believing for a comeback here. So, but my grandparents, I grew up going and visiting them in Alton, Illinois, and every single summer we'd go and spend a couple weeks with them, and got to watch my grandfather with a 10th grade education buy these huge houses on owner financing with he was a fireman, and so he'd have a lot of kind of time off, right? 24 on, 48 off type of thing. And he would go and owner finance and just work his butt off and separate these big houses into, I guess there's like a dentistry school in Alton. And so he'd take these huge houses and kind of make them these, kind of studio apartments and rent them out to some of the students there. And so I got to see that growing up every year. And then fast forward to my time in California, where I grew up. I lived there for about 20 years, where my parents pastor a church. Got to see something really cool where the church bought 10 acres of land for $88,000. They had plans to build a church, and so much red tape and zoning issues, and all the California stuff, right? And they just brick wall after brick wall trying to figure out how to do this thing. Well, the market appreciated, and I believe it was about 6 years later, a builder walked into the church office and said, "Hey, I'd like to buy that 10 acres of land." And it was like, "It's not for sale." And I said, "Well, why don't you look at this offer first?" And so, long story short, they were able to sell that land they picked up for 88,000 for 2.3 million
Oh,
instead of 6 years, and they kind of redeveloped it. And so those things, just watching that, just really piqued my interest. I love the power of real estate, and even when I was in vocationally in a ministry position as a youth pastor, and my wife was an RN, I'd go to bed every night looking at Zillow, trying to run numbers on if I could flip a house and all the things. So it's always been in my blood, and I just love doing it.
so what made you flip the switch and jump into it?
Man,
Nine
you
years
know
ago,
what?
what happened?
That's a great question, and I think sometimes um, I use this analogy a lot with people, and maybe analogy is not the right word, but this example, I kind of go and I think about seasons. I think about seasons are a big one for me, and I think that people underestimate the power of a season in timing. So I tell people, right parking lot, right bus, right seat. And to me, the parking lot is the season. You can be on the right bus and in the right seat, but the wrong season, it's just not a good fit, right? So I think that everything kind of aligned there in that moment about 9 years ago, where I felt like, you know what, I just don't feel as fulfilled in this. And I felt like purpose was going to be discovered by making that career switch. And instead of serving people at a church, I'm serving people in my real estate business.
I love that. So you guys got into 2016, and so that was 9 years ago, right? So yeah. So then,
Yep.
how did it go? How was that first year? Was it everything you thought it was going to be?
You know what? That first year, I remember I had this little chalkboard, and I told the kids, Dad's got a goal of selling 10 houses. And that was a pretty lofty goal. I remember sitting down with my team. I was making $35,000 a year as a youth pastor, and just happy to serve, but also it'd be really nice to have a little more margin in my annual budget, for my family. And had two little kids at the time, and so I said, Dad's got a goal of selling 10 houses, and we wrote that on there. And that year, I ended up selling 18 houses. Kind of surprised them. Didn't cross off that 10th one until we woke them up that we were going to Disney World, because they said if we sell 10, we're going to Disney World. So
That's awesome.
that
It's
was
like
a
you won the
cool
Super
year.
Bowl.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right. Yeah. So sold 18 houses for just under $7 million. I think it was like 6.7 or something like that in sales, and got Rookie of the Year in my KW office there. Then the next year went to like just under 10. I was like, man, I don't know if I can do that again. And after that year, my wife called me and said, hey, um, you know, I'm I'm pregnant again. And obviously I knew that, but she said, I can't do this again. I can't be at the hospital flipping over patients and bed sheets, right? Like working, and she worked med surge a lot. And so she said, I can't do this. I can't have a full term pregnancy and work 8.5 months. I'm spent. And I said, well, let's take that leap of faith. Let's bring you home. And that was the best decision we could have made. And so I love working with her. And I'm the ideas guy. She's such an executor of kind of dreams and a doer. And she's so capable. I feel I married way up. I outpunted my coverage, as they say in the South. And so the trajectory from there went from 10 to 12 to 22 to 48 million to $80 million in volume, just kind of every
From
year
22 to
growth.
48 to 80.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
want
So
to
it
make
was
sure
like
everybody heard
this.
that.
Yeah, yeah. We fast tracked it. I mean, we hired a coach. We got really serious, firm believer in coaching, changed some mindset, got really structured, went from, the Keller Williams term is went from E to P, got really purposeful with our numbers and who are we as a business? Are we just going and flippantly doing tasks, or are we really tracking where our business is coming from? And when we track that, we can double down or triple down on those activities and really focus our time there.
That's awesome. So when Casey jumped out of being an RN, did you guys immediately agree she was going to work with you in real estate, or was she just originally stopping to just not work anymore, or that was the plan all along?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it was the dream all along, right? There's a difference between plans and dreams, and I felt like I wanted it to be the plan, but it was a dream. And it's funny. I talk to a lot of people. I'm actually coaching somebody right now that's in a similar situation, that he's bivocational and kind of helping a little bit out. His wife is in the business, and it always comes down to something that is like you just know that it's not going to be that big of a deal, but yet everything in you says no, that's too big of a deal, it's too much of a risk. And for us at that time, it was healthcare coverage. It's like, okay, if we're going to go both be self-employed, from her being an RN, right, we had decent healthcare coverage. And I mean, just full disclosure, I mean, somebody can do the numbers. It's a real estate podcast, so you can do the numbers on what, 20 and 40 and $80 million with commissions can be. And Casey at the time was making probably about $55,000 a year as an RN. And I just think, gosh, what an obstacle that we had to jump over, but how small and how minute is that now, looking back, knowing what we know now. But it's funny, that was really what held us back.
Yeah, it's interesting, just little things like that. And I mean, health insurance isn't a
Yeah.
little thing, but in the grand scheme of things and the changes you've
Yeah.
made, it wasn't that big of a hurdle. In the moment, it certainly
Yeah.
does. It's getting through it and getting past it and aren't you glad you
Yeah.
did?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think I can get private healthcare coverage for, max like $18,000 a year for my family, and she's going to be at 55,000. Well, I promise you, she's generated far more than six figures every single year that she's been in the business. So it's just kind of a mindset shift, of kind of taking that leap of faith and believing in our abilities and what we're supposed to do together.
So what's the dynamic like between the two of you? I'm sure there's people out there that are also husband and wife working together, curious about this or maybe thinking about it, right? And it's funny. My when I got my real estate license, my wife was actually licensed and she was working commercial real estate. And when I got licensed
Yeah.
in 2007, I was like, oh, we could work together. And she said, nope. And she dropped her license and then did something else. And she was just like, no, that's not going to work for us. And it worked out, and I'm glad we did that. But then there's others like you guys who are working together and clearly working really well. At least it seems like it. So how has that been over the years?
Man, it genuinely has been awesome. It's not easy all the time, but it's been an amazing experience. As you could probably put two and two together, I am a person of faith, and you know, throughout like scripture, there's this talks of like synergy, and I think that marriage is something that's really cool where in a normal situation, I feel like two like-minded people, one plus one could have a multiple where it equals, three or four, right? You get that synergy. But I think in marriage, man, it's like a 10x. Like I think it's one plus one can equal 10 and 20 and 30, and so there was the best piece of advice that I could give somebody that's possibly looking into that was a piece of advice that I'll never forget it. We were walking through a Target one night and we saw some people that we knew, and it was a husband and wife that had worked together. And we were like, man, we want to do this, but we also want to just seek wisdom of people that we admire and are doing something well together. And they said, you know what? The thing that we can encourage you the most with is to establish your lane and stay in it. So if we do that, if I establish my lane and she establishes her lane, then there's this clear understanding of not just we can excel in our lane, but hey, you're in my lane. Like you need to be able to establish those things so that it's not this tension, but it's actually we can go fast together, but we're not running over each other and we're not doubling up on work.
That's great advice. So how are you guys also then balancing the work life family part, right? I mean, you're both in the business, you're both working together, how do you turn it off, right? There's so many people you hear in real estate that they're working 24/7 and they're on all the time. They're talking to people all the time. I mean, I can't imagine that's what it looks like in your household, 24/7 real estate, right?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I get asked that question a lot, and I don't quite, to be transparent, I don't really know how to answer it because, we have four kids, and Um, all I know is I show up to 90% of practices. I show up to 95+% of games. Both of us do. We have that capability, and there's going to be some sacrifice here and there. But overall, I think the thing that we love is when you're passionate about what you're doing, and it's not about just the transactions, but Keller Williams term, money is good for the money money can do, and so I'm sorry, money is good for the good money can do. I believe that's the term. So for us, sure, there's a lot of money to be made, and there's transactions and all these problems that could come up. But overall, if we are dreaming together on the what's the word I'm looking for a specific word on what the production of those finances and the hard work is going to do for our life. How are we going to benefit from that? What's the legacy we can build? And then letting our kids in on that dream, right? It's not, hey, be quiet, we're talking about business, right? There are certain times where I might say, hey, mom and dad have a meeting tonight and we're going to set you guys up for dinner. That might be once a month that happens. um, but they understand because we let them in on it, right? When we do a house and we buy an investment property with some of the revenue we generated from the business, you better believe I'm taking my 13-year-old and say, hey, what do you think's paying for that travel baseball and that $300 bat you just got, and all of that. Like, he's sweeping floors. They're understanding that one day these things are going to be passed down to them, and I want them to be proud of that. I want them to say, hey, we were part of that journey with mom and dad. We weren't just handed these things. So I feel like that's a very long way of answering your question, but I feel like it never stops, but it's always healthy when good perspective is kept.
It sounds more like a work family integration than a balance,
Yeah.
right? And you've blurred it,
Yeah.
blended it all together. And I love that you're
Yeah.
bringing your kids, to the projects and they're part of the meeting, so to speak, that they understand that, hey, this is what's going to happen tonight, and really learning that early, because I think you also help create a really good work ethic for your kids, and they
Yeah.
see what you guys are doing and how you're doing it, and that you get to do it together and you're working together. And so from like a relationship standpoint, I think that's really cool for your kids to see. And then from a business standpoint as well. Your investment property you mentioned, are you guys doing a lot of that? You want to speak to a little bit of that?
Yeah, so we have a total of 8 properties, and we're just under in total assets, just under about 8 million in investment properties, and so between our primary and our investments, and our goal is to buy a property that we go on a listing appointment, and it's a situation. We love the ugly duckling houses, and so I love to buy it under market value and then go and put some sweat equity into it, and have a ton of equity in the property, and it helps it cash flow. That Nashville's now more of an appreciation market than it is a cash flow market, and so we've built, a good amount of wealth in our investment properties, but we have to really underwrite a deal on the front end and make sure there's a lot of opportunity for sweat equity, and to put some work into it to have it cash flow.
On all 8 of yours, all single family?
Yes, all single family. Got a couple of townhomes. One of them is a lake house, and so we Airbnb probably. I think 4 of those are Airbnbs.
Okay. And do you guys service the Airbnbs yourself?
Yeah, all self-managed. Yeah, my
And
wife handles that.
and you guys booked pretty full and enjoying the Airbnb uh,
Yeah,
approach?
yeah. It is a lot of work, I mean, it really is. It's a ton of upkeep. So much so that, just being honest, like we're kind of kicking around, gosh, do we 1031 exchange into maybe some higher cash flow multifamily situations in other markets? Just to kind of take some off the plate, right? So that we have a little bit more bandwidth emotionally for our business and for our family.
Absolutely. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't own Airbnbs. I own rentals. We do long-term leases on ours. But I looked into it, and the one thing that somebody said to me, and I think what kept me from doing it, was that once you get into it, you're in the service industry. You're not really in the investing industry. You're still investing, but you become really involved in the servicing. And that's what it sounds like. It's that the turnover when somebody's in for a weekend and then somebody's got to go in and clean it and do all the things to get it back up and running and ready, and then, dealing with whatever the calls and whatever else happens. Is that fair to look at it that way?
Yeah, that's a fair statement. I think there's a lot of things you can do, to automate things as well. So, I kind of liken it to when you first sell your house. I remember how daunting that transaction was for me, the very first sale I had, and now, with less stress, I could handle probably 4 transactions with more efficiency than I used to do one. Right. So there's a certain degree of that, of like, you understand
Makes sense.
process and everything, right? So we have apps. One of them's called Turno that we use, and so we have all of our scheduling for cleaning that it kind of populates there with our bookings on Airbnb, and Casey runs all of that. So yeah, but at the end of the day, you're still a host, right? So you're out to dinner, and somebody's complaining that there's no more toilet paper in the house, and they're about to write you a 4-star review because they don't have a roll of toilet paper and don't want to drive to get one. That's on you, right? So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah, and and I'm glad you're sharing all that, right? Because
yeah,
I'm a big fan of real estate investing, and there's so many different ways to be able to do it. And I think, when Airbnbs first came out, first started happening, it was like the new sexy thing, and everybody was doing it, and the cash flow and how much money you could make. But just like anything, like, it's like, okay, well, let's peel it back and really look at, is that the right investment opportunity for you, and do you have the time, and all of the things. And you made a
yeah,
comment about the reviews. That was something else that somebody told me, was like, it is all about the reviews. If you're not getting good reviews, you're going to have a hard time continuing to fill it. So you have to stay on that. You have to respond quick. And, it's just making sure, I just want people to understand, they need to make sure they're doing their due diligence, their homework. If that's something they're going to get into, that they're really hearing what you're saying, that there's a lot there. Yes, they may make a lot of
yeah.
money in cash flow, but there's also times that you're out to dinner and you're getting interrupted.
Yeah, and it's calculating. I think it's really important to calculate it as much as you can, your dollars per hour. If you're making on your investment properties $150 an hour, but then in your business you have the potential of making $300 an hour. Well, it doesn't make sense to do that, right? You just need to double down, and then maybe save up a little bit more cash, leverage that in a rental, and maybe go more of a long-term mailbox money situation where it's not going to be as much, but you focus your time more on the money-making activities.
I think that's phenomenal advice. I love that. It's really the dollar per hour, and I don't think a lot of people really look at that, right? And I think
Yeah.
when, especially as realtors, you get into it and you're just doing all of the things, and sometimes you look at some of the things you're doing and going, "Is this something you should be doing?" And based on what you're getting paid, could you leverage that off? And I'd love for you to share a little bit around the structure of your team and how you guys have built it. And I know it's a little different than the norm while we're talking about leverage and how that's really worked for you, because it sounds like it's been a huge benefit for you.
Yeah, so I love talking about this because it's my journey, and I think that there's a lot of great things in real estate. I'll start with this statement. I think that there's a lot of great things in real estate and things that you can pick up at amazing brokerages like Keller Williams, name a dozen brokerages, and there's great lessons you can learn. I think where people get hung up is they stop learning the actual lesson and they try duplicating what's being said. So they're not picking up what's actually being taught, right? So whenever I say lead generation is going to be defined by the environment that other people have demonstrated what lead generation is. And that's going to look different across the board. When I say building a team in real estate, well, if you talk to me, and I've been your only exposure to real estate business, building a team is going to look a lot different than if somebody were to talk to you with your business, because we run two different models, and that's okay. It's not The real estate is not a one size fits all, but there's general principles. So a team is leverage, right? We only have so many hours in the day. How do you make your hours count with money making activities and helping people out, right? So for me, I was doing well in the business, and I thought that the next sexy thing for me to do was to start a team. And so I had no idea what the heck I was doing. I had no business starting a team, and I tried, and it failed miserably because I had no value proposition. I had no need to start a team. It was just something that I was trying to do to get a little bit more. When you first start in the business and you feel appreciated and people start recognizing you and noticing you. It feels good. And so you want to keep climbing that ladder in a way.
Where was your business
But
at that moment when you said I had no business starting a team, but it sounds like
yeah.
you've been doing a lot of business. So at what point were you volume wise that you felt like, hey, this is a great idea, and then at the same time now you're telling us that was a bad idea?
Yeah. So it was like 10 to 12 million
Okay.
was where it was at. And so, but what I tried to do was, I still had goals and I still had runway in what I could handle on my plate. And then I tried to start a team, and it was like, you have a pulse, would you like to be on my team? And that was just the wrong way to handle it. So when I hired a coach, I said, I'm thinking about starting a team. And he's like, why do you want to start a team? Well, it's in it. I was giving him the answers that he knew why I was doing it, and it was a vanity thing. It was something where I was like, man, I want to be up on a stage, and I can't be up on a stage unless I put up these numbers. And he said, Kyle, I want to tell you a story about a guy in my office. He's a single agent. He does 18 to $20 million a year, and man, he makes such great money every single year. He makes great money, and he's happy. And he's a pretty cool guy to know. It's like, okay, what are you trying to tell me here? I'm just thinking about starting a team. He goes, yeah, I want to tell you a story again real quick. I have this guy in my office that makes great money, and he's an individual agent, and he's got an assistant, and he makes all of his kids' games. He's just really happy. And so I was like, what are you trying to tell me, man? You told me that story twice. I told you I want to start a team, and he brought it around to, don't start a team just for the sake of starting a team. Start a team with purpose. Start a team out of need. Start a team out of vision. But don't just do it because everybody else is doing it and you feel like that's the next step. Have a reason. You gotta be able to tell somebody why you're doing it.
That's awesome. And I think that's huge advice. And I agree with you so much that, I mean, people are always like, oh, I'm just going to go do a team. I'm going to go, and you
Yeah.
ask them about the team. And it's kind of like what you were describing, and just a bunch of people. It's like, well, it's more like a group of people that are also all in real estate, where's the value here? And so I
Yeah.
think that is amazing advice, and really stepping back and figuring out, why am I doing this is the biggest thing. What's the
Yeah.
purpose? What is it going to do for me? For me, I wanted time back. And for me, it wasn't about, I love building the relationships and getting to connect with people, but I didn't want to do the day to day realtoring. I got in initially
Yeah.
because I wanted to invest in real estate,
Yeah.
and then learned how to build a real estate team. And so it was going to give me time back to continue to invest in real estate, which we still do. So that was my purpose behind it. And I think that's huge advice, is like, what are you doing it for? Is it just to do more deals? Because that just creates more headache, more stress, and no one's excited about that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that advice, I decided, you know what? I have to figure out how I just go and generate more business and focus on us. You said something that was huge, and it's the natural progression of business is, as an entrepreneur, as somebody that's in the service industry, as somebody that has your own real estate company. I can't tell you how many times I've asked a coaching client, tell me about your business. Why do people use you in real estate? And it's always the same thing. Well, I communicate well, and I give really good service, and I really like my clients. And I try to explain that every single person is going to hear that exact same thing. When somebody is saying, "What should I do? Why should I use you?" and that's your answer, and they're getting it from five other people, they're going to say, "Okay, well, so why should I use you?" Right? So there's this discovery of value that you have in your business that just comes naturally. The thing that you do better than anybody else, just because you're being an authentic version of yourself and doing it at a high level. And then at that point, once you figure that out, business and opportunity begins to attract itself to you from the actions that you're taking. And then at that point, it's the leverage piece. And so when we got to that point, Casey and I looked at each other, and it was, gosh, she was an RN, so she didn't make a ton of money, but she loved people really well. She was there, at people's bedside on their deathbed, sometimes holding their hand when there's no family in the room. She was there helping people through a very difficult season. I was doing that at churches. We had people in our home all the time, and just trying to love people really well. And so he said, "Gosh, this is what we're called to do. This is truly what we love to do, what we're good at. We help people build community, and we help people build wealth in real estate. If we stick in those two lanes and those two pillars, how can we build on top of that?" So we didn't want to get out of the relationship business. People wanted to work with Kyle and Casey. So then it was, how do we bring somebody on that's such a cultural fit for what we actually need? And so we built a team, but we started building it around culture first. And I think that that's the most important thing. If we want to love people really well, we want to treat every single transaction as if it was a transaction for ourselves. We want to build community. We do a lot of sphere of influence client events, and try to get belly to belly with people as much as possible. How do we bring somebody in that's a cultural fit to that? And then how do we leverage it out to where it's actually meeting the need that we have, and not morphing our business to fit the need of what we feel like it might need to be based on other people's experiences. So sorry, I'm a little bit long-winded with
No,
this.
this is awesome.
I
Keep
love this
going.
stuff. Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah. So what we did was, it was thing, I don't want to stop working with people. Casey doesn't want to stop working with people. So how do we have somebody come on and be an extension of us? So we had somebody, she is an amazing person. Her name is Jen McDowell. And I know Jen because her husband and I coached baseball together. Our boys are buddies at school. They've grown up playing baseball together, and we've become great friends. And Jen's been with us about 5 years. And we decided, man, if we build a structure, she wasn't in real estate at the time, but she was a cultural fit. And that was the biggest thing. She was a children's pastor. And I was like, you know what? If there's anybody that I know in an industry that I know that loves to take care of people, capable of wearing multiple hats, there in pressure situations, and just loves to take care of individuals, it's somebody in that field. And so we talked to her. She happened to be in that parking lot season, right? Of like, okay, the parking lot's changing. I can feel that. Now it's time to find the right bus. And we happen to be right season, right bus, and have the right seat for her. So we paid for her to get a real estate license. I taught her everything that I know. She shadowed me for probably a good 3 or 4 months. And then it was kind of like pushing her out of the nest, and said, "Okay, Jen, you got this." And she's been a rock star. The first year, a lot of tears, a lot of growth, but I could not imagine running the business on the sales side without Jen by my side. And we've hired another agent in the process. And then when it got slow, we had to go back down to one. But Jen's just been such a rock star. So how we developed that was, if she doesn't need to do any lead generation, if Casey and I are doing that and she's just working with our people, we pay a stipend. So we pay $2,000 a month, and then we pay 12.5% starting of the total commission earned, with that as a sliding scale, that for 2 years, and then 2.5% in addition every year until it's capped at 25%. And we do not hire, again, hiring out of need. We do not hire unless we have the business that we know that somebody can make six figures in our business. So failure to me is I'm not providing enough value and enough leads and enough people in my world if an agent that's working for me can't make six figures.
And then you have to let them go.
I either let them go or I give
Or
them the option. But to me, I'm not hiring unless I feel very confident that my lead generation activities in the market is calling for another six-figure earner in my
one
business
thing I
to
want to
leverage
point
to.
out too is the percentages work for you, and that's also based on your
Yes.
average sales price. So for
Yes.
anyone that's listening, right, make sure you're paying attention to that. Your average sales price is close to a million, correct? 900 to a million.
Yep. Yep.
Now you
Hmm.
working all over the place, but that's if that's your average, right? If somebody else is listening to this and their average is, 200,000 or 300,000, ours in St. Louis is 315. So,
Yeah.
you got to run those numbers to make sure it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And if the goal then is to make sure they're hitting six figures, does that
Yeah.
math, right? So,
And six figures was a number for me that in our market, that was where somebody could live a comfortable life, right? That's where you're getting a high level of talent in our area, and somebody that can comfortably, be there for their kids. They're not missing things. They're not building mansions, but at the same time, I feel like that's a really good income for somebody to make. And so, in some markets, that might be 45, $50,000 a year. And so I always encourage people, take that number. What can somebody live very comfortably in your area? Not in a crazy way, but also not at poverty, and then work backwards from there with your numbers and the amount of volume that you're predicting.
and I think that that's great advice. And you're also, again, going back to the value, right? Like you're making sure that your people are making the living they need to make. You're providing them with business. You're providing them with support. You're providing them with coaching, direction, all of these things. That's going to provide value. And that's also going to retain. How long has she been with you, Jen?
Jen's been with us for 5 years now. This is her fifth year.
And, I mean, the average life expectancy for an agent on a team is typically 2 to 3 years. So,
Yeah.
you're doing something right.
I heard somebody say this. I'm totally blanking on his name. I can see his face. He's out of Philadelphia, but he said his goal was to create a life big enough that he could create 100 millionaires in his world. And so my goal is, if I want high talent individuals around me, people that iron sharpens iron, right? I want to see them grow. They're going to cheer me on for growth. Then I need to be able to think big enough and stay in my lane of visionary and put some things in place and create a world big enough where that person that's working for me isn't just making 100,000. Okay, they made 100,000 consistently. They made six figures consistently. How do we get them to a quarter of a million? Then once they're there, how do we get them to 500,000? Right. And I think that if you get the right people, that becomes really easy to do. Because like I said, iron sharpens iron, culture's there, and you're doing a whole lot more with a whole lot less.
I love it. You're so clear on what it is you guys are after and what you want, and I think that's incredibly. It's just amazing that you have that because there's so many of us that are business owners, entrepreneurs, realtors that are just going and doing, and I think look up and go, man, how did I get here? Or I'm not sure. I'm going to do X amount, but I don't really know why, or whatever it is, and they're just trying to make ends meet or just trying to do deals, whatever. And I love how clear you are on how you're doing what you're doing and how you're attacking it. And that's really impressive. One thing
Appreciate
I
that.
like to dive into before we wrap up is
Yeah.
as a realtor, you've been doing this for 9 years. What's the funniest thing you've experienced in your journey as a real estate agent?
Oh man. Well, I got a couple, but I'll tell the most recent one. I have a pretty pricey listy listy, pricey listy. That's a new one. Pretty pricey listing in a prestigious neighborhood up in Nashville, and there was somebody that, it's one of those neighborhoods where we have to ask for proof of funds. We have to give their name to security, right? So we do like a little bit of a background check because it's a neighborhood that anybody with a license would love to come in there with a cell phone and do some Instagram videos, right? So beautiful home. And somebody had been blowing up my phone, this agent saying, "Hey, I have a buyer. They really want to see this." They were just so big on coming to this house. We looked them up, very legit. They show up to the house, and there's security cameras on the entrance and exit, and for somebody who was like really big on seeing this house, they were in and out of a 10,000 square foot house in about 35 minutes, which is difficult to do. Like, I mean, if you sprint through the house, that's difficult to be out of there in that amount of time, right? So all of a sudden I'm like, okay, they're out. I get a text from the agent, okay, we're all done, thank you, I'll be in touch. I was like, man, that was really fast. And then I get a call from my client to let them know, "Hey, you guys are good to go back home." And they go back in the house, and they're like, "Well, I think we know why they left. I had turned the plumbing off. We had a little bit of a leak in one of the toilets, and I think the guy just had something that upset his stomach, and he went in and just absolutely demolished one of the toilets and couldn't get it to flush because the plumbing was off. So he probably was like, I got to get out of here. The agent was like, "You'll hear back from me." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm definitely not going to hear back from you. Your client's going to ghost you because they're probably super embarrassed." So bad that they had to change the toilet out. Like, so bad. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Anyway,
They're like,
it's
"How do you
good. Yeah, it
rent
was
the
a good
house?"
one.
I'm going to call it number 2 on the list now.
Yeah. It's a solid 2 out of 10.
Oh
So,
God.
yeah.
I did not see this story going that way. I was like,
Yeah. It was pretty great. Yeah. Especially that I know the guy's like super successful, like multi, probably worth every bit of $250+ million. And I know exactly who it is. And I just always have that in the back of my head now. So,
oh, that's funny.
yeah.
That's a good
Yeah.
story.
It's good
Thank you
stuff.
for sharing.
Yeah.
Well, how can folks find you guys? You're in Nashville, Tennessee. If people have referrals, people want to inquire about coaching, I know you said you're doing some of that. How do we find you?
Yeah. Yeah, so started coaching consulting this year. It's called Priest and King Co. You can find me at priestandkingco.com, priestandkingco.com. And yeah, specialize in teaching kind of the model that we run. A lot of agents are saying, "Hey, I don't necessarily want to go with a big team. I like the sales, but I need more leverage in my life." About to launch group coaching too for couples in business. I feel like that's something Casey and I have done really well and are very clear on. So yeah, you can find me there. Instagram handle is Kyle Wallace. My wife is Casey Wallace, and hers is Mama Wally of 4. Yeah, give us a follow there. And yeah, we're in the Nashville area, but we primarily sell in Williamson County, which is just south of Nashville, in Franklin, Tennessee, Brentwood, home of Dave Ramsey, amongst other businesses. And anyway, great place to be. Would love to connect with folks.
Awesome. Well, we'll also add that in the show notes, and really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing all your wisdom. You have some amazing nuggets, so hopefully some people will listen to what you said and implement what you said and really think about some of the things that you said, and really appreciate your time. And thanks again.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Good to see you.
You bet. And that's going to be a wrap for another episode. Thank you, guys, and stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Realty Resilience. Be sure to join our free Realty Resilience Facebook group where real estate professionals connect, share strategies, and access resources. You can also follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more insights. And remember, we release new episodes every 2 weeks. See you next time.